talking about Turin Bar, the Tolkien story from the children of Hurin, and the issue is transcendence, that which is beyond material reality, and beauty and glory, and are these things real, and what does it mean that they're real? Here's Tolkien from the essay on fairy stories, where he says this: the shadow or flicker of divinity that is upon them they receive through humankind from the invisible world, the supernatural. So he's saying that in these fairy stories, there's this flicker of divinity, there's something from the invisible world, and I'm not sure how to take that. I'm not going to make a theological point. I'm trying to make a more philosophical point about immaterial reality, like the non-material part, which is like consciousness, patterns in being, the meaning, the beauty, the harmony. And so that's what I'm trying to get at through this. And transcendence in this line of thinking for Tolkien is a kind of a surplus of being. So like there's a thing, and that's the thing, like my hand, but there's more than the material thing there in any material thing. There's a surplus of being. And when we get it at the right angle and at the right story frame, it inspires. Stories inspire. And that taps into kind of the right hemisphere part of our consciousness that allows us to see the pattern. It's also, that's number one, it inspires. Number two, it is identity forming, because you and I are a person, and that means you have an identity. You have a sense of who you are, who I am. And we need beauty and we need stories to get a sense of that. And that's real. I mean, there are people who argue that that's a fiction, that your sense of self is a fiction, but I don't find that convincing. I think I know who I am, and I'm the same person I was yesterday, and when I was 3 years old, and when I hopefully will be much older than I am now, I have an identity. I have a sense of who I am, where I come from, where I'm going. Good. So this is beauty, which are in these fairy stories, which are in the Turin story, Turin Bar. There's beauty and there's story. And I'm kind of, I guess, drawing a parallel between beauty and story, that they're both, they're not the same thing, but they work in similar ways. And that is going to come out in the Turin story. And I guess I'm going to start by comparing it to the Oedipus story. And Oedipus, the king, ancient Greek myth, he, in a nutshell, has the worst luck in history. He was also cursed, where he accidentally killed his father and had sex with his mother and had children with her. And he didn't know it. And then when he finds out, obviously, that's not good. And he falls apart. But before that, we see that Oedipus had heroic qualities. He fought monsters to save the people of Thebes. He had great talent, and he was high in what we would call conscientiousness and emotionality, high in neuroticism. He had these, which could be positive or negative, but he had exceptional qualities that allowed him to become the king and become a heroic figure, which makes his tragedy that much more tragic. And then, in fact, when he has the bad things all fall upon him all at once, when he sort of sees them for the first time, he can't bear seeing them, so he plucks out his eyeballs, because He cannot bear to see what is real anymore, which is a horrible but really powerful image of the human experience. And I have an allergy. I'm going to take a cough drop and see if this helps me here. And so let's turn to Turin, Turambar, first age figure who is roughly 6,500 years before the time of the Lord of the Rings. I guess you can sort of think like us in the 21st century, looking back at people before the time of the pyramids in Egypt, or around the time of building Stonehenge in Britain a long time ago. And right there at the beginning, they're in the wars against Morgoth, who is the satanic figure, this kind of high angel who turns against God, who turns against the good and tries to subjugate the humans, and does to a large extent. And that's how he's going to win this battle called the Nirnaeth Arnoediad. Let me try to say that again. Nirnaeth Arnoediad, which was the battle of unnumbered tears, in which he defeated the combined forces of the elves and the humans and the dwarves. And it was a terrible, terrible loss to those forces. And the scholar Lisa Kutras, in a book about Tolkien, and I think it's on the theology of beauty, something to that effect, has a chapter called The Tragedy of Turin. So I'm partly drawing from her work there, where it's a tragedy like that of Oedipus, like a pagan, ancient Greek myth tragedy, but it has a little bit extra, which Tolkien calls eucatastrophe, good catastrophe, the ending, which has this kind of unexpected uplift of meaning and purity and goodness. Although it's a kind of obscured eucatastrophe, but I'm agreeing in general with Lisa Kutras, who says that it's there, that it's not just a pure, well, it's not a nihilistic catastrophe at all, and it kind of gets pretty close to nihilism, but with the uplift of goodness. And she quotes a statement from the Return of the King from Gandalf, which describes this effort and move that Turin is called upon to make. In those words, Gandalf says that we must walk open-eyed into that trap with courage, but small hope for ourselves. And we can see, Turin can see, and we can see, this is probably not going to end well. There's going to be a lot of pain and bloodshed and evil and triumphs by evil forces. But with courage and just this tiny little bit of hope for ourselves. And Kutras compares Turin's tragedy with a more uplifting tragedy, that of Lady Eowyn in The Lord of the Rings, who is human and facing a powerful being, much more powerful than she is, but with courage. And at that moment of vulnerability and courage in the face of a very, very powerful evil force, transcendence and goodness shines in a way that it does with Turin as well. And Kutras says this of Eowyn as she faces the Witch King and the Nazgul, who are just in the process of killing Theoden and almost kill her. And Kutras says this: Given that courage is an expression of the transcendental good found in the depths of being, it becomes a catalyst for a splendor so great that it pierces the unlight of horror. Um, and gosh, how do I talk about this? I have some notes here. Here's a quote. Because I'm trying to get at something that's really hard to get at, and I don't understand it fully, and I'm seeing inklings of it through Tolkien's help and people like Kutras. And Kutras quotes another philosopher and theologian. And I don't want to get too much into theology, but let me touch on it briefly here. David Bentley Hart, a brilliant writer. I've read some of his stuff. And in this book called Beauty and the Infinite, Hart, quoted by Kutras, says this: God's glory is neither ethereal nor remote, but is beauty, quantity, abundance, kabod. Kabod is a Hebrew word. It has weight, density, and presence. And let me try. I don't think, in fact, I'm not going to draw. I was going to draw. But what Hart is getting at there, and what I like about that statement, set aside the question of God, but just thinking about the transcendent good, this goodness that breaks forth, like at that moment of the courage of Eowyn, at the moment of the courage, even of the courage of Oedipus, we could say, that it's not just a totally ethereal, wishful thinking kind of thing. It is beauty. It is quantity. It's physical. It's abundance. It's kabod, which I guess is that's this Hebrew word like of abundance. It has weight, density, and presence. It's not like a wish. It's like really there. Like materiality has this capacity, has this effect at these crucial moments in stories, especially of these tragic figures. So let's get into Turin's tragedy. And Turin is like Oedipus. All these bad things happen to him. He's also the son of Hurin, who has been cursed by Morgoth. And so, and Morgoth is really mad at Hurin because Hurin refuses to back down and refuses to acknowledge the legitimacy of Morgoth. Again, Morgoth is this satanic figure, this angel, or of Allah, who has turned against God, Iluvatar. And because of this curse on Hurin, it curses his whole family. Turin accidentally kills Brondir when he's in this one place. He mistakenly kills a great friend, Beleg. He brings the downfall of the elvish kingdom of Nargothrond. He allows the captivity and murder of an elf maid who he loved, Finduilas. He accidentally marries and impregnates his sister, Nienor. She finds out and she commits suicide, and then he finds out and he commits suicide. And it's like, wow, that's a really bad set of luck for a guy who only lived to 35 years old. And so what's mysterious here, and Kutras brings this out, as do others like Corey Olsen, is that Turin has an amazingly important status in the Tolkien legendarium. For example, when Elrond talks about him, I think at the Council of Elrond in The Lord of the Rings, he names Turin a hero, like a high figure of ancient times. Would Elrond have met Turin? I think he would have. I think he was there at that battle in the First Age, 6,500 years earlier. And the other thing is, in a manuscript that was not published, that scholars have found, it indicates that at the end, of time, when there's the big battle between the Valar and Morgoth again, and it's Tulkas versus Morgoth, Turin shall deal the final blow. That he will come back, and he will slay Morgoth. So like, why is Tolkien making him such an important figure for the good? If he's like this kind of crazy guy who like had sex with his sister and killed himself and accidentally killed multiple people. And so I guess, do I have time for this? I don't. I'm not going to do a song. I'm just going to keep going. And look at another quote here where Kutras, in analyzing Turin and the sort of transcendent goodness that comes out in his story in spite of the darkness of it, says this, that beauty is not simply an adornment of the good. It is a glimpse of the transcendent revealed through the splendor of being. And heroic courage is crucial in this. And I guess, let me go to the drawing board here and take a stab at a drawing of this concept. It's very abstract, so let me try. Where, as we were saying, here's some existing things and beings, and a human and a rock and a tree. This is, just thinking about things which exist, and that they're just material things. But in the course of the story, this person's moving through time and through this space, and if it is a tragic story of someone who suffers immensely, and Turin is the man who suffers immensely, and yet bears witness to good and acts with integrity and courage. Whether that's Oedipus, whether that's Eowyn, Turin, these types of heroes, that goodness shines out, and you can see that. You can't see it physically, but you can see it. You're inspired, and that, number one, it inspires the hearer, and number two, it transforms your identity, or it shapes your identity, and we cannot be helped but be partly shaped by that in our sense of who I am and who you are, because of the beauty of that story and the beauty of that suffering. It's the same thing in the Aeneid, where Aeneas tells his horrible story of suffering, and it's just a list of horrible sufferings that he's telling to Dido and to the people around him, and she falls in love with him. She's inspired, and the same thing happens when Turin is in, is it Doriath, Menegroth? He's in an elvish kingdom, and this elvish maid hears his story and sees him suffering, and she falls in love with him. There's a goodness that shines forth that inspires a certain connection, whether it's romantic love or friendship love or just inspiration of goodness. And so Kutras will say that for Tolkien, the sorrowful and tragic have deep roots in transcendental beauty, often containing depths of immortal glory. And whether that's a theological immortal glory or just thinking about transcendence. I'm talking about, and this is a tricky word, and I've talked to different people who say, anytime someone tells me the word transcendence, I think that's just a lot of hooey. Transcendence. Like, what are you talking about? It's like the word spiritual or the word supernatural. They're like meaningless words to many people. But I'm trying to stick with this as a material thing that I was quoting David Bentley Hart earlier, that he says we're not talking about like some airy nothing. We're talking about like the materiality of that person's body and the weight and the presence, and it's now, its immediacy, that it is material. And the human body, the human face, there's a little face, is part of this. Like, there's something transcendent, revealing about a human face, and different philosophers have meditated on this, whether that's Emmanuel Levinas, who talks about the face, or what's his name? Another Jewish philosopher, his name will come to me in a moment, or John Paul II, who also Christian philosopher, thinks about the importance of contemplating the face, that the face, and it's funny, Emmanuel Levinas, Jewish philosopher who survived the Holocaust, who saw the worst of human life, theorized the face, like the eyes and the nose and the skin in this area. There's something about that physical space and physical reality that you cannot explain in terms of pure materiality. And so that is partly what we're seeing here in the story of Turin Bar. And so we'll continue to discuss this in the next episode.